Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Conversations Over Coffee with me, Rabbi Steve Warnick. Today, I am delighted to welcome Rachel Azaria. I look forward to talking with Rachel about the upcoming Israeli elections. Before we get to that, we are on Facebook, YouTube, and betzedek.tv. If you like today's conversation, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and share with your friends. Comments are always appreciated and help us get the conversation to more people. If you have any questions for our guests, please put them in the Facebook or YouTube chat, and we'll do our best to bring them into the show. With that out of the way, let me introduce our guest. Rachel Azaria has a very long resume. Let me just say that she is a social entrepreneur who served as Jerusalem deputy mayor and city council and a member of the Israeli parliament and ran social change organizations. She's the author of Guided Revolutions, which came out in 2020 in Hebrew, about effective social change in Israel. And she's the chairwoman of Life and Environment, the Israeli Union of Environmental NGOs. She holds a BA in Psychology and General Studies with honors and an MA in Conflict Resolution from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She's also a graduate of the Educational Leadership School at the Mandel Institute. And prior, of course, to her university studies, she served a full term in military service. In mid-2019, Rachel took a leave from her political work to concentrate on Israeli democracy, hence the most appropriate introduction for today's conversation. Join me in welcoming Rachel Azaria.
Hi.
Hi.
Good to be here.
That's a resume that an emo would be proud of.
I don't know. It's like people often ask me, why did you do, how did you do it? It's sometimes hard for me to give an answer. I have 4 kids. How did I do it when I had 4 kids? I don't know. I just did it. I wasn't thinking about it. Why did I do it? Just because sometimes I feel like I'm still in the youth movement, Chaser galgal, ani galgal. What needs to be done, I do, like that kind of. So that's it. I don't know if that was an introduction.
No wonder you and I get along so well, because I view myself very much in the same way.
Yeah, you need something needs to be done, so let's just do it.
Let's do it, right? What are we talking about? Let's just get it done.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's just jump right in.
Right in.
The Israeli elections have started technically,
Yeah,
and they're ongoing, and there seems to be, well, there's a lot to talk about here. First of all, it's the fifth election in how many years?
3 years.
In 3 years. I think because of what's going on in Great Britain now, Israel may be just the number 2 unstable democracy in the world as a result of that. Not a very good title to own. And yet there's something, at the same time, it seems like it might be the same thing all over again, and yet there's something different. What are you paying attention to and watching very carefully in this particular election?
So there are a few things that we can notice that people don't often notice. First of all, we have less parties than in the past. A lot of parties disappeared. A lot of parties merged, which is very, that's interesting. That doesn't always happen. Like on the right wing, we basically have only 2 parties. We used to have more. Used to have more central parties that were more kind of across the aisle. We don't have any of that anymore. You have to be totally pro Netanyahu, against Netanyahu, and that's it. You can't have anything else.
You would say that Yesh Atid is not a centrist party?
It is. First of all, I'll just say ideology is irrelevant at this point. It's either you're pro Netanyahu or against Netanyahu. And you can't be in the center and say, Netanyahu has his good, the good things he's done, the bad things he's done, and we know how to work with him. You can't say that anymore.
So in other words, the election is essentially, again, a referendum on Netanyahu.
Yeah, at the end of the day. And I think that the deep story that people don't talk about is a lot about the Mizrahi Ashkenazi story, which is something that whenever you bring up in Israel, people get very upset because it's a very heavy issue, but it's an issue that a lot of people don't want to discuss. It's very painful for a lot of people. And it is like, it's our it's not a trauma, but it's like it's our demon. It's like the area that we don't want to look at.
So let's not assume that our audience knows what we're talking about. Explain for us, what is the Mizrahi Ashkenazi?
Okay. So I'll talk about myself because it's the easiest, and that way also I don't get into trouble with anyone because anything I say is okay. So my father made Aliyah in the 50s from Tunis when he was 6. His father was very Zionist. When my father was born, so in his Brit, the shaliach, the person that was responsible for the Aliyah, said, my grandfather said, I really want to come to Israel. It was 1951, and he said, of course. And they shook they shook hands, and he said, of course, you're coming to Israel, and that's why my father is named Israel. Okay, my grandfather sells his business, sells his house, gets ready to make Aliyah. He comes to the shaliach saying, okay, I'm ready to make Aliyah, with the kids and everything. And they kept them for 60 years in Tunis. Why? Because my grandfather was blind. And there was a decision that you don't bring from Northern Africa people that have disabilities. And their letters that the shlichim from North Africa wrote to Israel saying, the father has a disability, but he has 10 kids that can join the army, because they needed soldiers. And it's like this really, these are very painful stories. At the end of the day, the older children were sent to kibbutzim, and really they joined the army. And then later, the rest of the family took them 6 years to come. Living 6 years, not knowing what's going to happen, that's very hard. My mother made Aliyah from the United States. Very different story, very different. And Israel, till this day, there is this, the scar of what happened in the past. It's not so much today, more than just, it is a bit, but it's more acknowledging what happened in the past.
And how does that play out?
It plays out in the sense that the left wing are more Ashkenazi, left and center, and the right wing are more Sephardic. The ultra orthodox is slightly a different story, whatever, but altogether, that's like more of the shape, more of the if you meet a Sephardic Jew, chances are higher that he's in the right wing or she's in the right wing. If you meet an Ashkenazi, chances are higher. So, and that's a big story that people don't talk about. And I think that's
so what are the social, economic, political, ideological, religious forces that roll into that political divide?
So usually the right wing is more religious. It's usually more traditional. Usually the less wealthier parts of Israel. The left wing is usually socioeconomic, better off socioeconomic, more liberal, obviously, less religious. There is a rift, a very, very strong rift between the groups. It's very hard. And, you talked about me leaving the Knesset and focusing on democracy. And my term, I was in the Knesset for one term. I was in local politics for a term and a half. And then I was altogether 11 years in Israeli politics. And when I was in the Knesset, the first 2 years were the regular 2 years of Israeli politics. I know how to do politics. You fist fight with this one, you fist fight with that one, you compromise, you do this, you find out it's okay. You fight for your legislations, you fight against legislations you don't believe in, the regular deal. And sometime in the middle of the term, things started going crazy. And it was, I felt like I'm standing on, in the middle of everything, and I suddenly see the world turning around and see everything kind of I felt we were losing it. And I want to be honest and say that in my wildest dreams, I didn't imagine 5 elections, but it was clear that something is wrong. And I think that we're dealing now with a lot of these pains that we have, a lot of these issues. And I think that the problem is that the right wing took upon themselves like the part of Judaism, and the left wing took upon themselves a part of democracy. And because we're fist fighting and every side wants to win, this is very dangerous, because Israel can't afford to become an only Jewish country or only democratic country. It's just, every one of them is just horrible, okay? We need to be a Jewish democratic country. And how did we become these two camps? You know, I know why it happened, but I realize how threatening it is. And basically, the work I'm working on is to see how we embed the universal democratic ideas in Jewish ideas, which I think that for Canadians and for Americans and for British and for a lot of Jews around the world, these are ideas that are almost obvious, you know, Tzelem Elohim, Yitziat Mitzrayim, you know, Avta et Hager, so much of this. In Israel,
Rachel, I just want to make sure that everybody understands the Hebrew, right? That what I hear you saying is that for those of us that live in the diaspora and in established democratic communities, some of these Jewish values that might have a particular lens but a universal application, such as being created in the image of God, and therefore the notion of human dignity for all human beings. The idea that we were slaves and we were free has to do with our approach towards not just human trafficking and racial injustice, but also economic aspects of work and of poverty and so forth. So keep going.
So a lot of these ideas that are Jewish ideas, it's very clear to many of us, or many people that live in, as you said, in diaspora and established democracies, that these are a lot of Jewish values. In Israel, for some reason, I don't know, we never learned that. It's not part of our textbook. And like when we learn Judaism, we learn more of, you know, like the particular part of Judaism, not so much the universal part of Judaism. And what we realize is that when you take universal ideas and when they're embedded in particular ideas, both of them get stronger. And that's mind-blowing, because suddenly we realize that really these two camps don't have to fight each other. So that's the work I'm working on, to see how we establish these kind of ideas. And I think that the more and more of these elections, it's, you know, it gets more and more clear how complicated it is. I give you an example about how much it's not like something that, you know, that dawns on Israelis, the universal ideas. I decided, I was just before Yom Kippur, I went running just 3 kilometers. It's like 1.5 miles in the morning, not much, because, you know, I'm fasting down during the day. So, and I started running, and suddenly, I said, what, soon is going to be Simchat Torah, and we're going to start again all of the parashot, portions of the Torah. And I said, I should do a weekly Parashat Shavua on these issues. There's so many of these ideas. And during Yom Kippur, I was, just before Yom Kippur, I was sitting down, writing all the portions, figuring out what I can put. And everyone during Yom Kippur was thinking about it. And I was right after Simchat Torah, I wrote my first post on Facebook. I said, I'll try it. I'll see how people react. And I was like, just make sure, please God, just make sure that, it won't be too embarrassing. Anyway, it's out there flying. It's like people are sharing it. People are excited. People got into the conversation. And I asked a friend of mine that she's very strong in culture in Israel. And I asked her, how do you explain this? I thought maybe it would interest a few people because it's not something that people know. So she said, no, she said that people are looking for ways to make these two ideas work together. So in that sense, there's a sense of optimism in what's happening in Israel. But
I know that
it's very hard to feel this optimism a week and a bit before the elections. Before.
I just want to comment that I know that you spent some time as a fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. That's one of the things that Danielle Hartman talks about, is that it's not a Jewish and democratic state, as if they're, the and as a conjunction, as if they're separate, but it's an Israeli democracy or a Jewish democracy, where so it's not a theocracy. And it's not a straight democracy. It's the blending of those two together, which is what I hear you, how I hear what you're saying, which is we need to come up with a uniquely Jewish approach to democracy, that blends two of them together. Can you talk a little bit about what I know concerns me, which is the rise of some of the more extremist right within Israel,
Yeah.
the Ben Gvirs of the world.
So okay, so I think Ben Smotrich, Ben Gvir, okay, they're two, and they're together. First of all, there are only two major parties in the right wing. I think that's one issue. There's the Likud, and usually there used to be, two other there were few options. We don't have those options anymore, and there's only, there are only these two parties. And I think that's one reason that they're getting stronger. And there are a few other reasons. One,
is that because of the change in the threshold for getting into the Knesset, or?
And also Lieberman used to be right wing, and he became against Netanyahu, so he's supposedly left wing, even though it's because it's against and pro Netanyahu. It's really getting our politics really crazy. Okay, so this is one, and also Kulanu, the party I was a member of, it died like. It disappeared, it vanished, because it was a party that was like across the aisle, and those parties can't exist anymore.
Yeah,
So there were
Kadima, there was a whole bunch of
yeah. So this is but after Kadima there was Kula. I mean, there was always this party. There was a central party. We don't have that anymore. Okay, because of the rift, because it became yes or no. You have to say yes or no. Okay, it is very important. That's how Israeli politics are today. I don't think it's good for us, but that's what's happening.
It seems very much like American politics at this moment too.
Yeah, very similar. So
it's nice to live in Canada, I have to say.
What?
It's nice to live in Canada, I have to say.
I know. Suddenly Canada became, from the country that, all the Americans look down at Canadians. Now all the Canadians look down at Americans. But
right.
I think that's always good, that the little brother or, the big brother, that, we take turns. So
right.
I'm happy about that. So in Israel, so that's one reason that Ben Gvir and Smotrich are getting stronger. I'm talking about the sociological issues, then I'll go on to like deeper issues. The second is that the ultra-Orthodox, some of them, there are a lot of the votes at Smotrich Ben Gvir are ultra-Orthodox, because they, their members of the parliament are older. It's like this generational thing, okay? And also it became like the vote that many youngsters are voting, because it's like every elections we have this, the party that it becomes hype to vote for, which it's pretty embarrassing to say that that's the party, but that's what's happening. And, he's like it's like voting as a protest kind of, because nothing works and he's the only one that says what has to be said. So, those are three issues. Now I'll go into the deeper issues. And I think that's something that is very hard for people that don't live in Israel to understand. Maybe it's not very hard, but we're going through tough times. I mean, in the 90s, when I grew up, when I was a teenager in the 90s, there was a story that the left wing could tell, that a lot of people, were part of the story. Give peace a chance, there really is hope. And twice Israel gave it a chance, and twice it just didn't work. Once was the Oslo Accords, that, we had buses blowing up in our streets. The second Intifada is one of the most traumatic events that we don't talk about, because we didn't even have the opportunity to air it out properly. Okay? And in Israel, the way we survive is that half an hour after every explosion, everyone continues. We just go back to life. That's how we do it. Okay. And the second is the Gaza Strip, the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. That suddenly we have missiles flying over Tel Aviv. We didn't think that would happen. And I think that this is an issue that isn't being discussed enough. And the way some people react to this is to become more extreme right wing. So around the world, the youngsters usually are more, against the Brexit, a more universal, more left-wing. In Israel, something about this, ongoing conflict makes it so easy to be a right-wing populist. So that's that.
So what are your thoughts? What do you see as the potential outcome of this election? Does Netanyahu get to form the government, or are we at a stalemate again?
Listen, it's probably the wise thing to say is that it would probably be the same thing, just because, it's just the same. It's the fifth time. What can be different? The only difference is that people are tired. You can't really expect people to go to elections every half a year. It doesn't work. People are like, what? And people are also like, they don't even remember which parties exist, which parties don't exist, who's in the Knesset, who isn't, who's really running, what's supposed to happen. No one even remembers anymore. And a lot of people are like, just figure it out and don't come back to us all the time. We are not like, people feel that the nation, we became the kindergarten teacher of the politicians that can't make it work. So a lot of people say, why vote? So
if there's a lower turnout, is the expectation that would be beneficial for the pro-Bibi camp?
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. It's that this is the weird part. I mean, it's not weird. It makes sense. But this is like, usually in politics, it's things are more clear. This time they're not clear. And it really is hard to know because, it's just, when I try to explain Israeli politics these days, I can say anything you'll say, I believe if you say that someone came down from the moon and became the prime minister of Israel, you know what? That's an option. I mean, things are so crazy that it's really hard to imagine what's going to happen. I think that, except for the politics, I think that the big story is that we need to do some soul searching in our country and work out some of our pains and some of our fears and figure them out. And until we do that, it's basically our leaders throwing the dice again and again and again.
So where does that come from? I mean, you need leaders to lead those conversations. So where does that come from? Where does it originate from, and how does your work with democracy think tanks propel those conversations?
So I don't think it can be done by politicians at this point, because it is not the classic yes, no Netanyahu. Because any of this discussion has to put aside the yes, no Netanyahu. And that's why I think it will happen only through the civil society at this point. And I'm a big believer in politics. I was 11 years in politics. I really believe that usually change happens in politics. That's where the power is. That's where you can really make a difference. But now Israeli politics is so messed up that it can only happen through civil society. And that's the work I'm working on, and establishing a democratic narrative. But you were talking about think tanks. Think tanks were the first stage. The real work is to establish a democratic narrative that people feel for. I was in politics for many years, and in politics, something you learn very quickly is that, and rabbis know the same thing, is that some people do some things because they think it's the right thing, but most people do things because they feel it's the right thing, because of their gut feelings, because of the way, you know that in services, that everywhere, right?
Right. It's actually people are instinctual, not rational.
Exactly.
And so what you need to do is you need to do cognitive behavioral therapy for the whole society. And
exactly. And I think it's usually when people talk about Judaism and democracy, they bring ideas, or they explain. And what we need to do is to make people feel it. And that's a big difference. And I think that until we get that work done, it will be complicated. Do we have another minute?
We have another 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Can you
So
give us an example of what that work looks like?
yeah, when you think about Judaism or Zionism, how can we feel for Zionism? Like, what was done over the past 70 or 80 years to make us feel so proud about Zionism? Okay, so we have national days. Okay, like we have Yom Ha'atzmaut. We have personal days. You know, the when our kids join the army, those are the days that we get very emotional about Zionism. We have songs, we have books, we have poems, we have movies, we have TV series, we have everything. We have children's books. We don't have that in democracy. This is work that has to be done. So that's what I'm working on together with a group of people. This is the idea. To, you know, if you read a children's book on democracy, so, you know, from a very young age, you have this excitement about it. If there is a song, if there's a movie, you know, that at the end, that's what establishes the narrative.
Yeah. When I was a kid, there was a cartoon about how in the U.S. about how a bill became law, and there was a song.
I am a bill, and I'm sitting on Capitol Hill.
Right, exactly. Everybody my age knows this, right?
Yeah, and in Israel we don't have that.
Yeah.
And when you have that, that becomes part of who you are. You're proud of it. You know, you were talking about the song, and I could see the smile on your face. You know, I don't know if you even noticed.
A nostalgia thing too about
but that's it's just like, why do we get so emotional about the, you know, the going to shul in the high holidays? Because it's our nostalgia. It's like what we did when we were kids. That's part of you know, establishing the excitement and the pride, and that's a lot of the work.
To what extent does Israel's lack of a constitution make that challenge, you know, kal v'chomer, all the more so more difficult?
So I think the issue of the constitution, once we have this, you know, embedded part of democracy, so I think it will be easier to establish a constitution. Now, when we're like, yes, Bibi, no, Bibi, we can't do anything. We just can't do anything. And we have some basic laws. I mean, we did get some of the work done. There's something that's very important for me to say, okay? Because I feel that this conversation was, you know, very hard. Okay, not very hard, but you know, it's what's happening in Israel is tough.
It's tough, and it's troublesome. It's frightening in some ways, right?
So I want to say that we in Israel, every 20 years, every generation, we have a huge challenge that no one thinks we can handle. We don't believe we can handle, and we always seem to handle it. And, you know, let's just go through the challenges, okay? 40s and 50s, what's the challenge?
Establishing the state.
It was against all odds. No one thought we could do it, right? It was totally a miracle.
I say to people, if you ever get to Beersheba, go to the tank memorial and look at the battle lines and tell me why this state exists. Only because the Egyptians, for whatever reason, stopped. Had they kept going, there wouldn't have been.
It wouldn't be. That's one. Yeah. Two, the UN. It was one of the only votes that also Russia and also America, United States, and the USSR were. It's like, so that was number one. Okay, 40s, 50s. Then you have the 60s, 70s. What was the big challenge? It was 67 and 73.
Keeping the state.
It was the big wars.
Right.
Those were the warriors, my father, the generation of the warriors. The days before the 6-day war, no one thought we'd be able to do it. Right. The first 48 hours of the Yom Kippur War, everyone's sure it's game over.
Right.
Okay, and they did it. And then you move on in the 80s and the 90s. The huge challenge that we had was economic
inflation.
Israel, right. Yeah, crazy inflation, hyperinflation. Right. You know, we changed our coin, our currency twice. Lira to shekel, shekel to new shekel. No one, our stock market fell. Israel almost went bankrupt. No one, and then we started Startup Nation. It was like, you know, from selling, you know, avocado and oranges to Startup Nation, you know, 80s and 90s. That's what we did. It's, you know, unbelievable. And then you move on, and that's like the macro. Then you move on to 2000, 2010. That's the micro. How do we make sure that everyone enjoys the, you know, the great economy that we have? And when you look at that, that's very similar to the pyramid of needs of Maslow. Okay. And the next stage in the pyramid, it's existing, security, and the next stage in the pyramid of needs of Maslow is who we are and what we stand for. And I think that these are the 20 years that we're going to be discussing this. We don't know, we're like all these groups that came all over, Sephardic, Ashkenazi, left wing, right wing, Arabs, Jews, ultra-Orthodox, Orthodox, semi-Orthodox, Chiloni, all of this. And how do we make this work together? Because in the meantime, it sounds like, it's like a Caponic. It doesn't really work. And this is going to be our challenge. Now, it's going to be hard. But every generation we can make it happen. And if, whenever it gets very hard, I tell myself, the first 48 hours of the Yom Kippur War, that was hard. Everything else, come on, we can do it. So
that's a great way to leave us. And maybe in a couple months, we'll get back together and we'll see where Israel is on these conversations. In the meantime, let's hope we can navigate this pain with as little
as little pain as possible.
As little pain as possible. Let's hope we can manage this time of transition with some good pain management.
I hope so too.
So that there's as little as possible. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you.
Lot to discuss here, and as I said, we'll look forward to having you back and continuing the conversation.
Thank you. I'd be delighted.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Be sure to check our website, www.beth-tzedec.org, for more opportunities to engage in a meaningful Jewish life with Beth Tzedec. And if you want to continue to watch this particular interview of Conversations Over Coffee, you can do so on Facebook, YouTube, or Beth Tzedec, all one word, .tv. Today's election day here in Canada. Don't forget to vote for your municipal elections. And if you're Israeli, don't forget to vote for the Israeli elections too. Your voice matters. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.